All right, we're live. The whole world hears you. Hello, world. Who's not here? McKenna. Whoa. Is this her first day missing? It has to be. I don't remember McKenna ever missing. Hi, McKenna. Or as Isaac would say, peace in McKenna.
Did you hear that? I heard the world's
Sweet. All right. Without further ado, let's go. Especially because we got the prospect. Hello. Especially because we have the prospect of a 3-day week. We got to get a little more intense here. Things have been going very well. Like from my perspective, when it comes to, am I going to be able to get like at least to the 1980s in this modern U.S. history class that we're doing now post Civil War? And right now, it looks like that's a very good possibility, but we're not even through the 30s yet, and we keep getting these 3-day weeks. So we got to get moving. This is where we left off, I believe, last time. Is that true? With the FDIC. So now when you go to the bank, you'll notice there's a big sticker on there about this big. It'll say FDIC, Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation. So we never have another situation where you put your money in the bank, you expect to go get your money out of the bank, right? Not when you go to the bank, they say we don't have it, and they won't even have it in 3 days or 5 days, or so many people are trying to get their money out of the bank that the bank closes, like the bank goes under. Whoa, that would be awful, wouldn't it? So that's what was happening in the 30s. So we made sure that would never happen again. More of the New Deal, more ABCs. By the way, there's way more than what I've given you like the top 8 or 10 programs. There's dozens of these federal government, national government programs put into place by Franklin Delano Roosevelt. One of the ones, the most successful ones, the most long-lasting ones was the TVA, the Tennessee Valley Authority. Did you guys read something or watch something that had to do with that?
Not that necessarily.
So again, think of the idea behind this. People are out of work. People need to work for more reasons than one. So economically, people need jobs. Here's what we'll do. We'll strengthen America's infrastructure. You know that word, infrastructure, like build bridges and electricity. Oh, by the way, it's the early 1930s. Many of the cities of America have been electrified. They've gone on the grid, but there's many rural places in America still don't have electricity. So how about if the government's going to finance these programs to put people to work, let's do something really useful for everyone. Sound right? Sound good? I mean, if that's the reality, that America has accepted the national government taking on this responsibility, well, let's make it work for everyone. The TVA was built for that. By the way, just 10 years ago, speaking of not everyone had electricity in their homes, and many of the rural places didn't yet in the 1930s. Just 10 years ago, my sister lived down in Portsmouth. Anybody know where Portsmouth, Ohio is? It's right down there on the river, across the river from Kentucky. And they knew someone that lived across the river, I don't know how many miles into Kentucky, that were in the backwoods of Kentucky, and they seriously, 10 years ago, did not have indoor plumbing yet. When I say yet, I guess they would never have it then, right? They just were okay with living without it. They did not have indoor plumbing. In 21st century America, there's people living like that today. It's amazing, isn't it? You got two similar sounding agencies, the PWA and the WPA. Both kind of did the same thing. Again, you got to put people to work. Let's do things useful like build schools, courthouses, hospitals, bridges. Even got involved in military drill. Building planes and ships. government has to get involved, according to Americans. Let's have these jobs that will benefit everybody. We talked about the original building that was this school. I don't know if they found out the date that's out there, but the original building that I went to high school in Leetonia was definitely built by the WPA. That thing right there, 1932, I think it was built. Well, it's gone now. Not the school in Leetonia now, that's pretty new, that's 20 years old. So you got the public works and you got the works progress. In the works progress, it went from just infrastructure, like bridges, dams, courthouses, schools, hospitals, to other public buildings, to parks, creating recreational areas for people, and even so far as to government providing money that would enable theaters to continue to operate. So giving money for even recreational things like going to the theater. Well, people can't go and escape from the realities of their hardship by going to watch movies or stage productions if those movie or stage productions don't have the money to put on productions, right? So the government was even providing money for that. And here's one that everybody knows of, one of the longest lasting, enduring programs. Well, it is the longest lasting, the most enduring, the most widely known. One of the programs that America became very dependent on, the SSA, Social Security Act. And now we call that program the Social Security Administration, so it's still SSA. And it was designed because we never want it to happen again in America where someone had worked, say, into their 60s, something like the crash happens, something like the Depression happens, and all of their income's wiped out and they have no income. What do we do with those people? Oh, well, the families take care of them. Okay, so that's always been the case. What if there's not enough family? What if they're not near their family to take care of them? What do we do with those people? So wouldn't it be nice if there was a system set up where people would pay into, every time they get paid, you got all your other taxes, state, local, national taxes, income taxes, but then there's another percentage of the money that's taken out of people's paychecks and it's put away for when they get older. Sound like a good idea? So that we wouldn't have this crisis for people that didn't have the wherewithal or weren't doing it before to save for crises or to save for retirement. Now, when people get older, they'll have income coming in. And 100 years later, this is so long lasting and enduring, and it's ingrained in our culture. This is a very hot political topic. To suggest that you would ever do away with Social Security, you don't have a chance to get elected, because this is something that people have become very dependent on. It's also a hot political topic because 100 years later, almost 100 years later, 90 years later, here's a big word for it, how solvent is it? In other words, is it really still working? When it was first implemented, you had a smaller percentage of your population that was elderly, that would have been retired and still living. As we've gone to the 21st century, the percentage of Americans that are elderly is greater than it was 100 years ago. So now you have what started off with an overwhelming number of workers paying taxes into the system to help take care of the elderly, and now we're getting to a situation where there's too many elderly to continue to make these payments for. So, solution, do you increase the taxes that you that you put on people's income to further help pay for them. Oh, by the way, this started in the 30s. In the 60s, there's going to be an addition to Social Security called, have you ever heard of this word? Medicare. You ever heard of that? So now you pay taxes to Social Security and Medicare, because now you're not only taking care of the retired and elderly when they with Social Security, but you're also taking care of their health care through Medicare. Oh, by the way, in the 60s, another thing that was added was another word sounds similar to it, Medicaid. Medicaid's more like not just for people that are retired, but for a welfare kind of program, that if someone doesn't have a job, they don't have income, they get welfare benefits like direct pay to help pay for their rent and stuff, but then also included in that is healthcare. All of these things being paid for. This all starts in the 1930s. This is a total change in the American psyche, American mindset about how involved national government should be in our daily lives, in our lives, in the lives of industry, in business. Why? Because from the crash to 1932, all those things we talked about Hoover tried didn't work. He was trying to take American tradition, combine it with, hey, the government's got to do something. And what we look back and now we say, wow, he didn't hardly try anything. Then those were things that, weren't traditional America, government getting involved like that. 1932 comes, and with Roosevelt's New Deal, people are like, I use the analogy, crying uncle. The national government has to do it. They're the only ones that have the wherewithal. There are so many people that are hurting. The local church and all the other local charities can't help. They're overwhelmed. Instead of one family in the neighborhood being down and out and everybody pitching in and the local church providing for them what they need for their temporary situation, now you've got, like I said, you look outside, you see 4 houses. One of those families has no income coming in. Every 4 houses, for real? Oh, by the way, in the black community, it was double. Now you've got basically about 50% of black families where they were unemployed. The government has to do something. So all of these programs that we're telling you constitute a change in how America views our government and how involved our government should be, especially Washington, D.C. It's always been a debate and conflict and battle in the minds of Americans and the souls of Americans between like how much individual liberty and freedom people should have compared to how much say government should have in our lives, right? That's always been a battle, always will be. But before the 30s, there was this traditional view of America that the national government should not be that influential. You're growing up 100 years later, obviously 4 generations later, it's like anytime there's a problem, where's everybody look? Washington. You don't know, listen, you don't know more than 2 people in your state government, I guarantee you. If anybody here knows more than 2 people in state government, I'd be amazed. But you know a bunch of people in national government, don't you? You know your president, your vice president, your speaker of the house, some of you even know who Chuck Schumer is. Anybody? Anybody know who Chuck Schumer is? Nobody? But most Americans do. We're very dependent now on Washington. Would you agree? Would you agree if something happens, if there's a storm, what happens? You ever hear of FEMA? Okay, you never heard of FEMA? Anybody here ever heard of FEMA? Whoa. The Federal Emergency Management Administration. FEMA is who comes in when there's like a hurricane or some other disaster, and they'll come in and provide all the help. You guys never heard of FEMA? F-E-M-A. Wow. So, because of traditional America, because of the mindset of America for 150 years before the 1930s, a lot of these programs are being challenged. There's a lot of opposition. The Republican Party is still saying, and some Democrats even, whoa, this is too much. The presidents on all of these programs are, first of all, getting way too involved in individual, in business and industry and in people's lives. Second of all, how much is all this costing? Back then, they used the word billions, right? So government involvement, government spending, is this constitutional? Is the national government given the right in the Constitution to do all these things that President Roosevelt's implementing? The people have cried uncle. They want them. But is it right according to our Constitution? And many of them got eliminated. They went to the Supreme Court and they got eliminated. So Roosevelt says, well, I got to stop that. I got to start making sure that I appoint as many federal judges and then Supreme Court justices that will support what I do. That becomes a major issue. In fact, if you've ever heard this term, it became a argument in the last 4 years. There's a term called court packing. Like, hey, right now there's how many on the Supreme Court? Anybody know? How many members of the Supreme Court right now? Please tell me you know. Of course, you don't have civics till next year. 9. There's 9 members of the Supreme Court. Why would it be 9? Why not 10? Okay, it's got to be odd. Everybody agree? Does everybody agree that the number should be odd, right? Like, you don't want some case going to the highest court in the land and then they're like, oh, we're tied. No solution, right? You want there to be resolution to whatever that problem is. So after the Civil War, it was basically settled on 9. Well, so that's been the tradition. Roosevelt floated the idea, did more than float the idea, really pushed the idea of, hey, maybe if I appoint, because it's not in the Constitution there should be 9. I should point that out. It's kind of been something that through the years, the Constitution said there has to be a federal court and there has to be a Supreme Court, but it didn't give a specific number of how many. So we settled on 9 after the Civil War. What does that mean? There can only be 9? Not according to the Constitution. So what if some president or what if some Congress decided with the president that, hey, we should increase the number? Maybe make it 13. Why? Well, in the short term, I, as the president, have certain things I want to get done, and the Supreme Court, as it is saying I can't do them. Well, maybe if I put 4 more members on the Supreme Court that agree with me, whether, like in this present time, in 1930s, liberal, justices, judges that will agree with all of these national programs, well, that would be good. Then I'd get all the things I want done. This became an issue in the last 2 election cycles. And there was kind of a talk of if in 2020, if the Democrats won, so if Biden won, that it would be wise of Biden to, hey, maybe he should. Maybe Biden should, because right now in the Supreme Court, there's 9, and the perception is, and based on who appointed them, there's 6 conservative justices and 3 liberal justices. It's not totally black and white. Like, depends on the issue. They don't all vote the same way, right? A lot of things come down to 5-4, even though it's 6 versus 3. Well, if things get challenged under a Democrat government, if you have, like we have now, President, Congress, both Democrat, and they get challenged and the Supreme Court says no, well, then they can't do what they want to do. So how about if we put 4 more people on? And we nominate all liberals, of course. So now you're at, what would it be? 7-6. Now liberals have them. But wait, where's that end? Well, what if the Republican wins in 2024? And they don't like that. So what are they going to do? We're going to appoint, what, 4 more? At what point is it silly to have how many justices deciding all these cases, right? Like, how many are you going to have? So every time a new party gets in power, they're going to pack the court with people that believe like they do. Kind of get crazy, wouldn't it? So thankfully, in 1930s, it didn't work. Even Democrats were like, okay, that's too far. And in your present time you're growing up in, they said, okay. And it gets brought up periodically, and usually saner, people with sanity say, no, that's not gonna work. Because what would happen is it would just keep going back and forth. Okay, who was this FDR guy? Well, he didn't just pop up out of nowhere. He was Assistant Secretary of the Navy in World War I. So he's kind of rising up through the ranks. He becomes a lawyer. I think it was Columbia. Does everybody know what Ivy League is? If I say Ivy League school, I just said one of them. Give me another one.
Yale.
Yale,
Harvard.
Harvard. Harvard was the first one, then Yale. Then you got Columbia. You got another one?
Princeton.
Princeton. Remember Wilson was president of Princeton. Dartmouth, Brown, Cornell. You heard of all those? Those are considered Ivy League. Those are the traditional American universities, going way back to Harvard and Yale, that developed this prestige and academia that if you go to one of those schools, you're considered the best educated. In the last several generations, those schools have gone from Harvard being a training grounds for ministers. Remember that? Remember learning about that? The beginnings of our collegiate education, university education in America was founded on godly principles, Harvard, Yale, and those Ivy League schools who started off with those intentions have turned into, in the last several generations, being breeding grounds for liberal ideology, theology, and political thought, right? So now the idea of an Ivy League, that is even now a very divisive issue in America. Like Ivy League used to be kind of like almost universally, oh, Ivy League, my kid went to an Ivy League school, that's great. Well, now they've become so liberal that you got half the country like, I would never send my kid to an Ivy League school for that indoctrination. Does that make sense? So it's kind of lost its luster a little bit, but still not totally. I mean, if you tell somebody you went to Columbia or Princeton or Yale or Harvard, you're automatically thought of as greater, obviously greater than someone that went to Youngstown State, right? Are they? I don't know. But they got that prestige, yeah. Yeah, of course you have to pay the premium. So you go to Youngstown State for, I should know this, less than $15,000 a year. Or you go to Harvard for $100,000 a year. Depends on what your priorities are. We mentioned last week during the video when they showed FDR speaking, and he was at that lectern, and he was standing there, and I mentioned real quick that thing had to be pretty strong and sturdy, because to get FDR to be able to stand there and speak was difficult by the time you get to the 30s, because in 1921 he got polio. Polio is one of those diseases in America that's been pretty much wiped out. I shouldn't say pretty much, totally wiped out because of the vaccination process. That was a vaccine. Vaccines are, you get the vaccine, you don't get the disease anyway. That's a different story, different topic, different subject. But, that's what a vaccine does and is supposed to do. And did. Things like polio and smallpox, stuff like that. He's elected governor of New York in 1928. A stepping stone to the presidency for many presidents is that they were once governors. Why, Noel? Why would that be like a big thing? That Americans are more comfortable in electing, let's just give you two choices. Americans are often more comfortable electing a governor rather than a senator even. Why do you think that might be? Like what kind of leadership? I mean, Senate's a leadership. Like, what do you mean? One starts with an L, one starts with an E. Or executive. So a governor, listen, what is the president? The president is the chief executive of a country, right? He's the commander-in-chief, chief executive, chief of state. He's the head of the state, right? Well, governor's the country. The governor's the head of the state. So the governor has experience and being that overall leader, administrator of a huge entity like a state, right? So a lot of our early presidents were like Governor of Virginia, Governor of Ohio. Those are stepping stones to the presidency because of their experience and executive position. Remember, Roosevelt's known for two very famous quotes. One, yesterday, December 7th, 1941, a date that will live in infamy, as he talked about what happened on, this was on December 8th, as he talked about what happened on December 7th with Pearl Harbor. The other most famous quote is what he said coming into office in 1933, the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. Telling the American people, communicating with them that, hey, things are bad, right? And just as Hoover tried to put a happy face on things, tried to be optimistic, telling people, hey, remember that one time he said in 1930, depression's over? Trying to make people feel good. That whole idea of one of the contributors to the depression lasting so long was this overwhelming dread, pessimism that said, oh man, this is awful. We're never going to get out of this. Look how long it's going on. Oh, and that kind of perpetuates itself, becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Well, Roosevelt's trying to instill some confidence. Let's be upbeat. Listen, the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. Don't fear. We're going to get out of this. And if we stay in this fearful kind of malaise, then we're never going to get out of it. Kind of reminds you of the last 2 years, doesn't it? Hello? You picking up what I'm laying down, Kenzie? Could we use this famous quote from FDR today? The only thing we have to fear is fear itself. With the downturn and the awful economy that we experienced the last 2 years, by the way, on the heels of what many said was the greatest economy in American history in 2019. As we come out of that, we're not going to come out of it if people keep living in fear, are we? Now, whether you think the fear is legitimate or not, are we going to come out of it if people keep living in fear? Are there more and more people that are saying, okay, we did it. It's been 2 years. I'm done with COVID. You ever heard anybody say that? There's a lot of people saying that, right? We've done everything we can. We expedited a vaccine. We've masked. We've shut down. We've done all of these things. And people are finally saying, more and more people are finally saying, if we go on living in fear, how's anything ever going to get better? Big thing. The only thing we have to fear is fear itself. He's telling America, I'm offering you a new deal. We're going to make things better. Maybe other than Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan's nickname was the Great Communicator. Whether you agree with the legacy of FDR or not, he was obviously a great communicator. He instituted this idea of these things called fireside chats. Your family's down and out. You've been living through this depression for 4 years, 5 years, 6 years. The government's giving you a job. You finish that job. Now you're out of work again. Your government gives you you understand that the government keeps trying, but they keep failing. Well, when every month or so, or every few weeks, you're in kind of despair, but you're able to turn on your radio, and the president isn't just some mythical character somewhere in Washington, D.C. that you're like, you feel like blaming him like they did Hoover. Roosevelt developed this relationship with the American people where he was speaking to them. This is a big deal. He was speaking to them in their living room. Of course, they couldn't talk back. It's just radio, right? But remember, there was no TV. They would get a daily newspaper where they might be able to read about the events of government. But listen, to have the president, who most people would have thought of as like some, hey, wow, that's a very big position, and they would rarely ever see him, right? He's talking to you in your living room. things are bad, but he's periodically coming and talking right to your family. Your family just had dinner, if you can afford it that day, and you're sitting around, you got the fire in the fireplace trying to stay warm, and literally the president's talking to you, telling you that this is what we're doing. The government's going to do this. We're going to keep trying. Stay with us. We're trying. Don't be in despair. Don't fear. We're going to get out of this. We're all in this together. I am for you. So even though from 1932 to 1936, things don't really get that much better. But guess what? Your president cares. You know he cares because you hear him periodically speaking to you in your living room with these fireside chats. That's a very comforting thing to a lot of Americans. But this is a big deal. Emphasizing again, the 1930s, FDR is a pivotal point in American history. We go from 150 years of the general idea of America's relationship with their government being stay out of my business to 90 years later, you're growing up in a culture in America that says, hey, government, what are you going to do about it? True or not? If something happens in America, is it not normal for you to think that the people in Washington, the president or Congress, or like that organization I said, you never heard of FEMA, they're going to come in and take care of the situation? Am I wrong in thinking that that's the way we all think? That is the way we all think. That's not the way they thought for 150 years of our history before the Depression, before FDR, before all these programs got implemented. It was more government. One of the things that made someone like Reagan so popular, the great communicator, is even though American mindset changed, there's still a lot of people even today that harken back to the way it used to be, the way the founders had set up the government for the national government not to be so strong. And when Reagan came along and said, the solution to our problems, government is not the solution to our problems, government is the problem, that caused a lot of people to stand and cheer, and that's what made Reagan so popular. These things kind of go in cycles. But still, even with Reagan, there was still the overwhelming thought that the government has a responsibility to take care of people. But he appealed to people's, sentiment, nostalgia. This is what the country was as America became great with the government not intervening. And when Reagan came along and said, yeah, that's what we're doing. We're getting back to that. Government is not the solution to your problems. Government is the problem. Or what is it, 9 words? The worst 9 words you could possibly hear. Hello, I'm from the government and I'm here to help. Right? That was a very popular thing that got Reagan into the presidency, and a lot of people today still love him for it. Court packing. We talked about Roosevelt wanting to increase the courts so things would go his way. Okay, maybe this is the last thing. We might have one more thing after this. Listen, in 1936, you still had 33% of Americans that were either malnourished, didn't have adequate housing, or both. Roosevelt still got elected in a landslide. Even though all these things that he's trying to do aren't working, he still got elected. Contrast that to Hoover. He took all the blame. All those things we talked about he tried to do, they said, you're out. Roosevelt comes along because he's such a good communicator, because he's going into people's living rooms with this new thing called radio, able to communicate directly to the people, tell them how much he cares, tell them how much he's trying, seen as a man of the people, where Hoover was seen more as a symbol of, look what happened with big business. You catching this? So now, even though people are still suffering, he still gets reelected. In 1937, 5 years after Hoover was bounced, there was a decline, get this, there was a decline in the economy that was actually, by the numbers, worse than 1930. Roosevelt's going to get reelected again in 1940. We talked about how bad things were. If you were a black family in America, it wasn't 1 out of every 4 homes, it was 1 out of every 2. Black unemployment was as high as 50%. Big change. I said all the change in the relationship to government. Here's another big change. Some of you are astute enough politically to know that today in American politics, 90% of the black voters vote for Democrats. How many knew that? You guys didn't know that? When Trump ran in 2016, the common thinking was if Trump can get 10% of the black vote, he's going to win. In 2020, there were all these polls. Trump's actually getting more than 10%. There's a lot of problems with 2020 election. He got more than 10% of the black vote. So, but before the Depression, most blacks voted for Republicans after the Civil War. Now, 1936, Roosevelt gets 76% of the vote, and it's been that way for 100 years. Productive Monday. We needed that. You want that. You like that.
We just not do work today.
Oh no, we just had such a productive history class. I'm so
This is
excited.
math class, not history class.
I'm so excited.